independence movement, a historical overview. And we stopped at Black struggle in Detroit and the prehistory of the, let me make sure, always mess these up because Republic of New Africa. All right, let's go. Detroit's story is one of migration, racial conflict, and Black liberation struggle against the backdrop of industrial growth and decline. From the 1880s through World War II, the opening of new industries in Detroit prompted a migration that dramatically changed the city's population density and demographic makeup. Detroit's renowned as the quote motor city, end quote, beckoning immigrants from all over the nation and world whose residency in turn helped the city become the fourth largest in the United States in 1920. In one period of tremendous growth between 1910 and 1920, Black migrants increased the city's African American population by 611.3%. This dramatic increase resulted partially from the expansion of the auto industry and the, quote, relaxation of discriminatory employment practices. That's in quotation, the relaxation. Detroit met steady stream of Black migrants originating from almost every state in the Deep South and several northern Atlantic states. With World War I and the anti-immigrant legislation that followed Black migrants from unprecedented success in Detroit's labor market. Despite new work opportunities and growth in the African American population, Black Detroiters had not overcome the major racial obstacles that characterized their quest for employment and decent housing in a wartime era and its aftermath. Companies hired Black job seekers out of desperation and hired them at whim. And tensions between Black workers and their white peers often led to violence. In their search for economic security, some African Americans began joining an organization within labor unions, such as the Congress of Industrial Organization. Black union participation gained momentum during the 1930s following Franklin D. Roosevelt National Labor Relations Act, which gave more flexibility to workers trying to collectively organize for their rights. Although many Black workers were initially skeptical of unions, talented organizers in Detroit managed to recruit enough of them to give Black laborers some presence and power. Notwithstanding these opportunities in industrial workspaces, factories such as restrictive covenants, discriminatory loan practices, racialized violence, and, quote, blockbustering, end quote, kept Black Detroiters packed tightly in city's east side. When African Americans like, Osian, Sweet move into white neighborhoods, they were greeted with enmity, and violence. Sweet was a, what is this? Gynecologist. Sweet was a I think this is gynecologist. Let me look. I'll right back. Let me find the word again. There it is. Come on, highlight it. There we go. All right, back, everybody. All right, it was gynecologist. Okay, let me reread that. When African Americans like Osayan Sweet moved into white neighborhoods with their they were greeted with enmity and violence. Sweet was a gynecologist who moved into a segregated neighborhood in September 1925. anticipating a hostile welcome into his new home, Sweet and his family arrived with several pew-pews, ammunition, and food. As he expected, a group of white Detroiters gathered outside his home, and at one point surrounded and threatened Sweet's brother and a friend. During this tense moment, someone from Sweet's one fired a weapon from Sweet's house, unaliving a white man who was standing on the porch across the street. Sweet and 10 others were arrested and charged with murder. An all-white jury ruled in Sweet's and his 10 confidants' favor. The historic victory encouraged some African Americans to continue pushing to live where they pleased and to remain resolute in their right to enjoy all aspects of life uninhabited. Still, the antagonism towards black Detroiters' ambitions continue, and tensions erupted into anti-black violence during the race riots of 1943, the worst disturbance the United States has seen to date. Black Detroiters' campaigns include strong showings of African American women activists and met with government repression of the early Cold War, as they did in other cities through the 1940s. African American women fought thoroughly for economic security, demand equal access to public accommodations, hosted voter registration drives, and contested police brutality, among other activities. For example, the Detroit Associations of Women's Club sponsor, quote, voters' institutions, end quote, and to educate its members about voting pressing social issues, and political candidates. These women involved in the National Association for the Advancement of People of Color, they flipped it over, NAACP, and United Auto Workers, UAW, the Detroit Commission of Community Relations, DCCR, and other national and local organizations in their often successful enterprises. However, black women and men activism was complicated by coordinated repression against communism and anything mainstream politicians could label as subversive, quote unquote. As the defense attorney for the Communist Party and lead attorney with the U.S. Department of Labor, George Crockett experienced high levels of repression, including a 4-month sentence in federal prison for contempt after defending future Detroit Mayor Coleman Young and other targets of the House Un-American Activity Committee. Crockett's work made him ineligible for public elected office until 1966, after a nationwide black civil rights activist pushed enough reforms for him to operate freely. White people, too, gave varying levels of support to black equality. Henry Ford began implementing a seemingly more egalitarian business strategy, and the UAW and other unions became more open to promoting civil rights. That's weird. Together, such shifts, when combined with the efforts of black activists, helped bring welcoming changes. Although these efforts did not end racism in Detroit, by the 1950s, the city's African Americans achieved more economic and political power than ever before. Together, the various factors promoted some to revere Detroit as the model city, quote unquote, and the, quote, one of the major centers of black progress, end quote. As scholars August Mayer and Elliot Rudwick pointed out, quote, this progress came at the very time that the multiplying NAACP legal victories and the dramatic rise of Martin Luther King to public prominence signified a revolution of expectations that was spawning a new militance among black Americans. That's the end of the quote. New modes of struggle that favored direct confrontation instituted a new era of black activism. Shifts in directions and strategies caught caught the attention of 41st, 42nd, and 43rd governors of Michigan, G. Mennen Williams. That's Mennen Williams, John B. Swanson, and George Ramney, respectively, who each utilized the power of the positions to aid civil rights causes from 1948 through 1969. They gave state-funded efforts unprecedented power to investigate and address violations of their constituents' civil rights, thus making the state one of the most radically progressive in the nation. In Detroit, this racial progressivism manifests through the Civil Rights Commission's involvement with housing and employment discrimination and police brutality. Though the Michigan governors, particularly Romney, deserve some credit for their willingness to use their executive power towards the advancement of black civics equality, it was a national civil rights movement that determined Detroit's activists' successes. Where the governors and the civil rights activists failed, discrimination and racial violence persisted. Those oppressive tendencies influenced how black political organizations in Detroit evolved into the 1960s. All right, I should look back a little bit. Looks like we're doing okay. No one's weird. All right. We go make sure that this is all the way up. There we go. One organization that attempted to create a major equitable Detroit was the Trade Union Leadership Council, TULC, created in 1957 with the help of Horace Sheffield and international representatives for the UAW to improve the conditions of black workers in their workplace and unions in a field of labor veterans who were still recovering from recent anti-communist assaults that spread to and weakened a range of left and liberal activists and organizations. Sheffield and the TULC's role in the black community resulted from political assaults on the National Black Labor Councils. They used the N-word they used the black, Detroit body and the Local 600. Carrying on the work of those radical organizations, the TULC made visible the rifts in the, quote, liberal labor coalitions which had grown out of the Black Union Alliance during and after World War II. Yeah, they left. This coalition included the NAACP, Detroit's Urban League, UAW, Jewish Community Councils, various black churches and Civil Rights Commission, and the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, among others. The TULC, making sure again if it's on here. It's not on here. All right, cool. Where was I at? The TULC fought racism within labor unions and staged frontal attacks on racist restaurants, skating rinks, bars, and many other accommodations and recreational facilities, while white providing for financial support to the Southern movement. The council also supported the election of racial liberal Jerome Kavanaugh as mayor in 1962. In some ways, the undertaking of the TULC proved to be a liberal dressed rehearsal for the activism stage by black leftist groups, including those that would involve Milton and Richard Henry. One such group was the Freedom Now Party, FNP, an all-black political party founded by journalist William Worthy and others just before the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Party organizers sought to make the FNP national, but gained momentum primarily in Michigan. Grace Lee and James Bogg, Reverend Albert B. Cleage, I think, and several other activists helped create the Detroit FNP directly following the 1963 Grassroots Leadership Conference, in which Malcolm X delivered his speech, quote, "Message to the Grassroots." They sought to make the FNP a recognizable force in Detroit City and Michigan state politics, with the hopes to transform U.S. party politics. Several fairly well-known black Detroiters ran for local and state office, including Milton Henry for Congress, radical lawyer Christopher Alston for Senate, and Reverend Clinge for governor, with the inter-radical support of the Socialist Party, of the Socialist Worker Party, and the members of GOAL, and, oh my gosh, her HUHURU. I gotta hear, what is that? Is that up? Let me find out. Maybe see if it'll let me sound it out. It won't let me say it. A militant black student group whose leader would later play instrumental roles in the creation of a revolutionary union movements, RUMs. It seems that the FNP would achieve its desired results. However, disappointment reigned as a primary vector when all FNP candidates lost their respective election. The party quickly declined thereafter, but was succeeded by the RUMs, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, the League, the Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM, the Black Panther Party, BPP, and Malcolm X Society, and the Provincial Government of Republic of New African. Hold on a second, I gotta remember. New Africa, yep. The League was a coalition of RUMs, which is, do they have it on here? I don't think they have it on here. No, they don't have it on here. The League was a coalition of RUMs that formed at various auto manufacturing plants, e.g. Dodge or Drum, and Ford or from FUM, and sought to organize black workers as revolutionary vanguards of the United States. The League's ideology fused activist understanding of capitalist exploitation of workers with theories concerning the radical exploitation of the black colony in the United States. League members argue that if black workers could take control over the means of production, these laborers would provide leadership to oppressed groups and eventually create a society free of radical economic and gender oppression. The League also anticipated that revolutionaries in the United States would aid similar movements against imperialism abroad. Moreover, leaders from the League were central participants in the National Black Economic Development Conference, NBEDC. Resolutions from the conference allowed the League to secure funds for the creation of a Black Star line of press publication, film production, and a bookstore. They also made a film, Finally Got the News, which documented the League's struggle and ideals. Although the League and the Provincial Government Republic of New Africa, let's make sure that's right. Yay, I'm getting better at it. Disagreed on the issues of reparations. They had a generally amicable relationship and even worked together on activities related to Robert F. Williams. RAM was another important organization in Detroit, which is the Revolutionary Action Movement. It was a revolutionary organization created by Donald Freeman and Maxwell Stanford Jr., student activists with Cleveland and Philadelphia, respectively. It had a national and a largely underground membership, and it boosted the support of Malcolm X and Robert F. Williams, Stanford, and later known as Arbar Muhammad Hamad. I said that name horribly. Establishing a revolutionary Revolutionary Action Movement Group in Detroit in 1963. What page? 83. All right, let's do this. In the maintain close relationship with many prominent Detroiters, including Henry Brothers, though details of RAM's history in Detroit are still largely a mystery. Hamed Stanford was made, it's AHMAD. Stanford has made it clear that the organization held a consistent presence in Detroit before 1963 until it dissolved in 1968 with the intentions of becoming the PGRNA's left wing. Members of the league attempted to organize a local chapter of the BPP in hopes of attracting young activists and push the National Black Panther Party away from an ideology that envisioned a lumpen proletariat as the vanguard, a black revolutionary struggle. Hold on. Okay. However, it was instead a branch of the Detroit Black Panther Party founded by Ron Scott and Eric Bell about 1 year after Ram's dismiss that ultimately earned recognition by the National Party Central Committee. Among the Detroit branches, the contributions to Detroit's political landscape was its work with the National Committee to Combat Fascism, a Black Panther Party front group that in Detroit invited white radical groups to participate. More important, the Panthers established an underground membership in Detroit that established a close relationship with the Republic of New Africans Army and the Black Legion. A long-standing pillar of the black political scene was Nation of Islam, NOI, born in Detroit on July 4th, 1930. Besides promoting black nationalism and spreading its bands of Islam among African Americans, the nation was responsible for one of African Americans' most celebrated icons, Malcolm X. The NOI provided Malcolm Little with the basic spiritual and cultural tools he needed to transform himself from a street hustler to a minister. Malcolm X and later Eli Haji Malik El Shabazz, I probably messed that name up. He underwent his initial training in Detroit, where he made several memorable appearances. The NOI, through Minister Malcolm, had a tremendous influence on the two brothers from Philadelphia who helped shape the goals and strategies of black revolutionary activism in Detroit, most notably through founding the PGRNA. Just real quick, looking back again, because I've been told I have to do that. All right. The elder brothers, Milton Henry, moved from Philadelphia to the Model City in 1950 because it was one of the fewest cities in the United States where he could utilize his legal practice explicitly for the benefit of African Americans. In 1952, his young brother Richard joined him, and they worked together in several civil rights organizations. In November 1961, the Henrys, Reverend Cleage, and other militant civil rights activists created GOAL, a civil rights group that sought to introduce what Richard Henry called, quote, a new dimension in fighting against bias, end quote. The GOAL chairperson, Richard, added that the NAACP and other organizations, quote, can at times benefit from outside help in accomplishing their goal faster. Although GOAL began with a stated purpose of assisting groups like the NAACP achieving their objectivities, and organizations quickly distinguished itself when some of its members began to, quote, rethink integration, end quote, considered it, quote, almost as dangerous as it is desirable, end quote. With the stated membership roster of 750 names, Goal championed a, quote, catalytic, end quote, method of activism that included using boycotts and legal battles to achieve the goals of getting African people's contribution to history added to public school textbooks and halting urban renewal projects, or, quote, they use inward removals. According to some Goal members even helped sponsor a new campaign that demand that white merchants carry a black-owned company barbecue sauce. Many of these reforms-oriented activities built on the momentum of Goal's liberal predecessors, such as the TULC. Over the years, Goal developed bonds with radical left organizations and participated in militant activities. It was involved in study groups and actions against police brutality with the members of Uhura and RAM, as well as, oh my gosh, Boggses, Boggses. On occasion, Milton Henry gave talks at the Friday Night Socialist Forum, hosted by the Socialist Workers' Party, and he held a leadership position within RAM. Together, RAM and Goal members co-founded and participated in self-defense groups and Medgar Evers Rifle Club and the Fox and Wolf Hunting Club. The first honored the slain AACP activists. Activists likely named the other in recognition of Malcolm X's December 4th, 1963 characterization of white liberals as foxes and conservatives as wolves. Learning from the example set by the Deacons for Defense and Justice, Richard Henry explained that they formed the club to deter political violent attacks on African American activists in their city. It is conceivable that they were also trained for potential guerrilla warfare. With this association and the lessons they learned from years of struggle, the Henrys began to advocate for separate nation as a viable solution to African Americans' problems. Taking their cue from Brother Amira, scholar William Van de Burgh and Raymond L. Hall credited Malcolm X, Melchi Shabazz, with pushing the Henry brothers to accept tutorial black nationalism as the most practical option for liberation. Milton met and developed a relationship with Minister and Henry brothers used Goal to sponsor 3 lectures for him when he visited the model city. In addition to his, quote, message to the grassroots, end quote, Malcolm X delivered, quote, the ballot or the bullet, end quote, and his, quote, last message, end quote. In Detroit, after Shabazz unaliving, Milton and Richard changed their names to Ganda and Amaria Adabarkara Odella Obadella, I think, respectively, and created the Malcolm X Society, which they charged with working towards Shabazz's imminent goals for territory and revolution. The Obadellas believed the ministry's primary concern was to create a sovereign black nation that would help developing world revolutionaries destroy global oppression. Even though Malcolm X was essential to Henry's political development, the brothers' life experience in Philadelphia and over the decades spent in Detroit wielded as much of an impact on their political perspectives as did the NOI ministers. Milton was a World War II veteran and a pilot whose refusal to accept racial discrimination led to his dishonorable discharge from the military and contributed to his inability to practice law in Pennsylvania. As a youth, Richard, who viewed his older brother as a hero, was an activist with the NAACP and the journalist who used his media talents to challenge racism. Also worthy of recognition are the siblings' organizing experiences in Detroit with groups and individuals who, as early as December 1961, had begun to, quote, rethink integration, end quote. The Obadels Association with Reverend Cleage and, I'm sorry everybody, Bog says Rem, Huhuru, and others who formed Drum. The league should not be minimized. Indeed, the brothers' decision to work with these groups and individuals was opposed to the NCAA or the TULC organization they deemed to be peopled with, quote, I can't say this word, UTs. Reflects the lessons they learned from their experiences, struggle for freedom from under U.S. sovereignty. By the time they met Minister Malcolm, the, oh my gosh, Obadels experiences already prepared them for his 1963 message. Oh, nice, thank you. For Milton, in particular, I'm going to stop here real quick and look, because everybody tells me to look back, so I must look back. There we go. All right, cool. Where is... All right. Sweet. Where was I at? I thought I had it. Okay, yeah. By the time... Oh, yeah. I'm going to read it. Oh, yeah, message. For Milton in particular, traveling to Ghana... Wait, I'm going to read this. By the time they met Minister Malcolm, the Obadels' experiences... and I'm probably saying that name wrong, already prepared them for his 1963 quote-unquote message. For Milton, in particular, traveling in Ghana confirmed the importance of attaining political and physical independence as the basis of power. He was inspired by seeing Kwame Nkrumah and other African quote-unquote guys he'd gone to school with in Lincoln and their offices making decisions, end quote. That affected their country. In contrast, as the only black member of the Pontiac City Commission, Milton became discouraged because he was not able to make decisions that he believed would benefit African Americans. This inability confirmed his conviction that African Americans would never gain the power necessary to change the United States according to their needs. With these influences in mind, rather than single out Malcolm X as their primary reason, that the Henrys marched leftward to revolution and nation building, end quote. We should situate the martyred minister influence within the broader context of their personal experience working to improve conditions for black Detroiters. In 1964, the Obadels had involved... Hold on, everybody. All right, sorry, everybody. By 1964, the Obadels, I'm saying that completely wrong, had evolved into territorial nationalists with revolutionary goals. when they created the Malcolm X Society in 1967, they initially saw it as an apparatus to work within the governmental framework. Hold on a second. And state structures of the United States, winning black people first in Mississippi to the cause of independent land and power followed with election victories, the sheriff office, particularly within the U.S. federal system, and finally taking the black state out of the U.S. federal unions at the moment when white power could no longer be successfully resisted or neutralized in its efforts to prevent the creation of a new society in the black state. The Malcolm X Society's aspirations became evident through its call for black people to secure control over their own communities in the aftermath of the 1967 rebellion. Considered by many as the worst urban rebellion of the decades in 1967, Detroit's uprising deserves brief mention here because it helps explain the trajectory of the Obadels as they approach the creation of the provincial government of Republic of New Africa. There we go, got it. The Malcolmites, like most other political organizations, attempted to use the insurgency and the widespread fear of violence it spawned to leverage their demands as they organized shortly after, to claim to represent, quote, the political side of the Black Revolution, end quote. And instead, they could manage street revolutionaries if the city and state governments met their demands for community control. Apparently, the FBI and the local police took such assertions seriously enough to increase their surveillance of the Obadels immediately following their insurgence. The rebellion, the Malcolmites' demands, and the local police and U.S. government's increasing surveillance of black activists all came to form the specific context in which the Obadels, I don't know how to say it right, I'm sorry everybody, organized the National Black Government Convention. The event of 1967 also signified the definite bookend of the political organizing strategies the brothers and their allies favored during much of the 1960s. Leading up to the establishment of the PGRNA, the Malcolmites changed their strategy to include gaining African Americans' consent to create a separate nation through diplomatic and, if necessary, military means. In 1967, rebellion marked a turning point for black Detroiters. For their part, the Obadel brothers recognized the movement's revolutionary potential and used the lessons they had drawn from it to hasten their call for the creation of an independent black nation state. But their appeal for land and power was not due solely to the violence of or in response to the uprising. Instead, decades of lived experience in the Motor City crystallized when the seemingly opportunity to dismantle the status quo appeared within reach. From the Malcolm X Society, the event of July 1967 created space for their political project. Less than 1 year later, they would meet in hopes of bringing their ideas to fruition. All right. Next will be the National Black Government Convention and the creation of the PGRNA, which is the Provisional Government Republic of New Africa. New Africans argued that the NA, let me make sure what this one is, because we're coming up. The New African Independence Movement is the broad-based struggle seeking an independent black nation state in the Black Belt region of the United States. Although they trace the movement's birth to the 1968 Detroit Convention, former PGRNA official, Chakawi Lumumba, indicates that its roots go back to the mid-17th century when European settlers began to racializing enslaved Africans with legislations that passed that passed the mother's status to her children, naturalizing maternally. Oh wait, I can't say this word. Matrilineal enslavement. He indicates that the enslaved often liberated themselves and attempted to create their own maroon communities, at times with indigenous nations outside of European slave system. According to Lumumba, the foundations of this long-standing movement grew stronger when black immigrationists in the United States, such as Paul Cuffey, Henry Highland Garnet, and Martin Delaney, sought land in Africa and elsewhere. It continued in the 20th century with Marcus Garvey and the Universal Black Improvement Association, they use the N-word, whose estimated 2 million members took up the call, quote, Africa for the Africans. The same era marked the inauguration of the African Blood Brothers, ABB, which supported the institutions of any independent black state in the southern portion of the United States. Although it is estimated to have included between 5,000 to 8,000 adherents at its height, the small organization influenced the Communist Party, CP, to attempt to promote the idea of black sovereignty, a maneuver that increased black support of the CP tremendously. The CP adopted the quote-unquote black belt thesis, which identified portions of several southern states in which black people were entitled to self-determination. Lumumba claims that although the CP eventually dropped the idea and lost much of his black backing, several former black communists and Garveyites, included Queen Mother Audley Moore, A-U-D-L-E-Y, Moore, continued promoting territorial autonomy independently and through the NOI, which is not up here. Oh yeah, Nation of Islam. In fact, Lumumba and Muhammad Ahmad both credited Queen Mother Moore for influencing Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad to take up the struggle for independent land. Malcolm X and Queen Mother Moore were largely responsible for making the notion of an independent black nation palatable to the activists who found the PGRNA, taking up and revising the Black Belt Nation argument. The Malcolmites sought to liberate 5 southern states: Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. They recognized that the South was the region where the majority of enslaved Africans and their descendants resided. Further, as enslaved laborers and then sharecroppers, Africans built on and tilled the earth in those states, thus helping Anglo-Americans prosper. Therefore, according to the Malcolmites, the 5 aforementioned states represented African Americans' historical quote-unquote homeland in the United States. The Malcolmites presented these and other ideas at the National Black Government Convention held in Detroit on March 30th and 31st of 1968. I keep saying this name wrong. It's Obadelles. The Obadales. I can't say it. And the Malcolm X Society were not alone in these efforts. A variety of middle and working class individuals, paramilitary organizations, socialists, former SNCC, and organizations of Afro-American unity activists, Black Panthers, Pan-Africanists, and non-affiliated Black Power advocates who participated in the National Black Power Conference in 1967 attended the 1968 Detroit Convention. Lumumba states, quote, "The fact that most prominent culture and the revolutionary nationalists of the period at least lent their name to the efforts was indicative of a high regard which existed for the founding of new African independence movement throughout the new African nation and within grassroots new African communities, end quote. Among these well-known supporters were Queen Mary Moore, the US organization, the US, it's US, this is US organization. Oh my gosh, Maulana Karenga, Malcolm's widow Betty Shabazz, famous playwright and poet Amir Baraka, John Bracey of Ram, and several other black nationalists, included some who held high ranks within original provisional governmental structures of the Republic of New Africa. Yeah. Convention participants dedicated both days to their meetings to discussing and resolving issues concerning citizenship, national sovereignty, taxes, and governmental functions, opening diplomatic relations in other nations and the United Nations, and, quote, achieving status for black guerrillas under the Geneva Convention, end quote, in addition to ratifying a Declaration of Independence. Brother Gadai, I can't say Gandhi, Gadai, I can't say it, invited, quote, 3 categories of persons, end quote, to the convention. 1, participants who are black nationalists ready now for separation. 2, observers, black people who are genuinely interested in separation as a possible solution to our problems in America. 3, technical advisors. The last group of invitees include, quote, black people, rather nationalist or not, who have something to offer the new government and its founding efforts, such as lawyers, scientists, economists, and industrialists. The conversation held during the convention demonstrated such people's importance. Talks centered the international human rights law, reparations, women's equal participation in military strategies, or some combination or derivative of them. An example is participants' agreement that new African citizens who might be captured by the U.S. police or other law enforcement and or armed agency then carrying out a military work of the provisional government should receive prisoners of war, POWs, status. Attendees include the POW status should not be dependent on an actual, quote, declaration of war against the U.S., and they recommended no declaration of war, end quote, so that, quote, members of the Black Revolutionary Military Forces would have rights under the Geneva Convention, end quote. During the second day of the convention, participants spend considerable time discussing and signing the Declaration of Independence of the Black Nation, questioning the legitimacy of U.S. citizenship, and demanding restitution for African enslavement and its legacies of discrimination, racial violence, economic oppression, and more. The document connected the struggles of African descended people in the United States with a global effort, quote, to destroy this oppression wherever it assaults mankind in the world, end quote. The Declaration promoted a, quote, new society and a, quote, new state government that would ensure individuals and collective human rights and that renounced the discrimination and persecutions of one's religious belief, race, color, and sex, pledging to pursue these ideals, quote, without reservation, end quote. Queen Mother Moore signed first, making the founding of the provincial government and the new African independence movement. At a rally later that day, convention participants Raymond Willis announced that the new nation would be called the Republic of New Africa, end quote. Those opposed to the original purpose names the Songhai Republic, end quote, as a quote unquote provisional government. The PGRNA designated itself as the temporary leadership to the captive black nation of the United States. The original structured consistent consisted of executive, judicial, and legislative branches. The executive branch included a president, first and second vice president, several regional vice presidents and treasurers and ministers of diverse functions. At the RNA's founding, participants elected exile former Monroe, North Carolina, NAACP president and RAM chairman Robert F. Williams as president. Brother Gaida, Gaida, was first vice president. Sister Betty Shabazz as second vice president, and brother Amara, where am I at? A leading theorist as a minister of information, and so things remain for 1 year. Giadi, or I don't know how to say it, Giadi, restructured the leadership following the New Bethel shootout on March 29th, 1969. The move resulted in replacing the first and second president with 4 regional vice presidents whose primary task was to help the president carry out his or her duties to defending the captive black nation and securing reparations and sovereign territory. Following the convention, the PGRNA's first step in achieving its goals was to open negotiations with the U.S. government. Brother Amir attempted to initiate this process in the late 1968 when he delivered a message requesting a diplomatic conversation with the Secretary of State, Dean Rusk. All right. Okay, hold on. Let me look back. No worries. It leads to dictatorship. Dictatorship of the working class. All right. Vice President Gaidai Abedel signed the request as Milton Henry, quote unquote, in lieu of the exile Robert Williams. The Odedels hoped that requesting diplomatic negotiations with the United States immediately after the RNA's founding would demonstrate a conscious new Africans and potential, quote, citizens of record, end quote. The provisional government, PG, was serious about achieving physical separation and political independence. This appeal to conduct negotiations brought the RNA into compliance with the various steps necessary to take its struggle for independence to the United Nations. Furthermore, the provincial government keep doing this, messing this up. I can never remember. Republic of New Africa understood that the U.S. government will not willingly open discussions to hand over 10% of the nation's land resources. Thus, the anticipated response to the letter would serve as more proof to African Americans that they could not rely on the U.S. government for liberation. Liberation was something that for black people to take in on their own terms. This necessary confiscation justifies the creation of a, quote, a strong, disciplined black legion in America, a black army to fight for black rights, end quote. Brother Amira provided an overview of the PG's total agenda to achieve political independence, territorial sovereignty, and reparations in a speech called, quote, the 8 strategic elements necessary for success of a black nation in America, end quote. He characterized the first 3 elements as, quote, the nation's wealth, end quote, natural resources and labor force, and, quote, the genius that our people possess, end quote, each of which would allow the burgeoning nation to develop the skills necessary to make the nation strong. The fourth aspect was, quote, a limited objective, end quote. The acquisition of 5 states. Brother Amira expected a relatively smooth overturn of the 5 states because they encompass the poorest and contain the largest concentration of African Americans. Therefore, he justified the U.S. government would not find the domain desirable, and would not try too hard to keep it once, quote, giving up something became inevitable, end quote, for the United States. However, he was not as naive as the statement may seem to indicate. Instead, he expected that it would take serious efforts on the part of new Africans to conceive America, to convince America to give up that land. It would require solidarity from other Africans in the United States, as well as support from international allies. The fifth factor, quote, internal domestic support, helps explain why the PGRNA sought to establish consulates in several major cities across the United States. Officers of the PGRNA reasoned that maintained its presence in cities where African Americans held, quote, positions as congressmen, judges, and other officials, would enable them to develop relationship with black people who could, quote, be used to stay the hand of the United States in its efforts at repression of New Africa's campaign for liberation. Further, black communities could use their collective resources to achieve control over local schools and other institutions that brought African Americans into close contact with one another and the bureaucratic state apparatus, representing a departure from other Black Power era liberation efforts. Quote, community control, end quote, was not at end in itself for the Republic of New Africa, but part of a larger procedure to gain land and power. RNA leadership anticipated that influential allies throughout northern cities would lend it with useful bargaining tools in negotiation with the U.S. government for New Africans' independence. RNA officers expected to trade on the social and political capital wielding by black-controlled northern cities and people for land in the southern, and presumed that RNA-controlled southern land would serve as a foundation of their black nation. The 6 necessary strategic elements. See what time it is. We're doing good. See here. All right, that was it. The 6 necessary strategic elements emphasizes gained international allies. The PGRNA apparently began meeting with representatives from several potential ally nations and groups, including the USSR, Tanzania, and Sudan. Although there was no clear indication of how extensive such conversations were, attempts at developing these relationships confirmed that new African leadership hoped to be taken seriously by establishing nations. The new African leaders also hoped to gain the support of the United Nations as they demanded reparations for the human rights violations committed by the United States against enslaved Africans and their progeny up to contemporary moment. Let me make sure. I'm gonna look up this word. Right back. It was progeny. Yes. Progeny up to the contemporary moment. Brother, oh my gosh. Amira later claimed he initiated deals with China, and these negotiations seemed to be going well until the PGRNA ran into complication in its relationship with Robert Williams. The titular president began losing faith in China, Cuba, and, quote, all developing world liberation types organization, end quote, whom he accused of being prejudiced against African Americans. With such ambiguous goals, the RNA leaders did not disregard potential repression. In fact, they expected violence from the U.S. government and racist vigilante organizations such as the KKK, Ku Klux Klan. Therefore, Brother Amir's, yeah, I think that's it. Final two essential elements addressed the RNA's military strategy, which he divided into 3 levels of participation. The above ground army, the Black Legion, later named the New African Security Forces. Third, world military support, and the so-called second strike capability of underground urban guerrillas. Brother Amir argued that the combination of these varying levels of military strength would be threatening enough to prevent possible violent confrontation and or preserve the fledgling nation in potential battle. Never supply violent militants. Detroit New Africans planned to implement several programs aimed to spreading their ideas and attracting new cadres. First and most important was their political education, quote, nation building, end quote, classes held at their office and on Puritan Street. New Africans met regularly with new recruits to prepare them for RNA citizenship. They also wanted to create all black schools modeled after Ocean Hill, Brownsville in Brooklyn, New York. An institution whose struggles for community control, Brother Amir participated in and tried to get to support the independence movement. The Detroit Consulate ran the Frederick Douglass Pew Pew Club, which seemingly served as a recruiting tool for the Black Legion. The club encouraged interested persons for frequent its daily meetings, which included national building classes taught by Brother Amir. The RNA also conducted conversations about running free food and clothing programs to address some of the immediate materials needed by Black Detroiters. But there is no evidence to determine whether these ideas were materialized. Finally, New Africans initiated a, quote, freedom petition in April 1969 that sought to, quote, place police, central banking, and industrial development under a Black city council and create an all-powerful Black school board and a Black court system in a Black community. Based. Because Black people are never go to trial with their peers. They're always tried by white people. So that's based. The League of Revolutionary Black Workers and Eastside Voice of Independent Detroit helped circulate the petition, yet it is unlikely that the petition gained widespread endorsement. Further, it is difficult to ascertain which programs the RNA actually carried to fruition and what efforts survived in Detroit, especially considering the many internal and external challenges New Africans faced. Obstacles. Robert F. Williams and the RNA's first constitutional crisis. And RNA is stand for, just in case, for people that come in, Republic of New Africa. The earlier years, let me see here. Let me see where I'm at. 48. Yep. Okay, there's a stopping point. 48. So, we'll stop there at 54. Stop there. We'll go to 54 and I'll stop. All right. The early years of the PGRNA was plagued with overlapping obstacles that culminated in a split and led to Amir Obedel moving to RNA headquarters to the south. The first obstacle that they had to overcome was the absence of their elected president, Robert F. Williams. New Africans devoted considerable attention to meeting with Robert Williams and devising a way to bring home their president in exile. In early June 1968, the Abdallah brothers took a 7-day trip to Tanzania, where Williams and his family were spending some time. Many of the meetings' specific details remain unclear, but Williams did, quote, signal some agreement. With being elected, RNA President Williams likely came to this decision due to Brother Gaddy's promise that the provincial government of Republic of New Africa would help him return to the United States and, quote, keep him on the streets for at least 2 years, end quote. The Obadels believed that if Williams, quote, were on the streets for 2 years, New Africans could build a movement so strong that nobody could touch him, and the movement would be a power, end quote. With Williams' confidence in this promise, Brother Gandhi, I can't say it right. I can't say it. Became one of Williams' key legal representatives as an exile activist negotiated the conditions of his return home with the U.S. government. Meanwhile, the Abdels expected Williams to secure diplomatic relations between the RNA, China, and newly dependent African nations. In fact, he was reported to have a close friendship with Abdul Rahman Mohammed Badu, one of Tanzania's government officials. The provincial government of Republic of New Africa delegations revealed that the trip was also brought them into contact with, TSEPO, Tetsatusu Lukuku, I can't say it right, an exiled South African, a member of the Pan-African Congress, one of the major political parties fighting apartheid. Despite these highlights, the Obadels trip revealed the first of many points of tension between Williams and the RNA, as well as within the PGRNA. Brother Amir reported that Williams expressed reluctance to accept the presidency of the Republic of New Africa, and instead exhibited a preoccupation with receiving money to build a hospital in Tanzania and return safely to the United States to face the kidnapping charges that resulted in his family's exile. Informants for the Detroit police and federal government claimed the Abadels shared this and other discouraging news at a meeting with Republic of New Africa leadership. This disclosure suggested that Williams' intention did not correspond with New Africans' desire. Also, in this situation, a test of trust and loyalty has become apparent. The leadership decided not to reveal those complications to the general citizenship for fear that such news would jeopardize their movement. Eventually, however, issues surrounding Williams rose to the surface and contributed to the internal conflict that led to the first constitutional crisis. That's what happens when you don't let everybody know and you don't let criticisms come out. In the meantime, at Williams' suggestions, Brother Amir began to drive to notify the U.S. government and the United Nations that New Africans gave the provincial government of Republic of New Africa their consent to enter negotiations for reparations and the independence of their nation. I can't say this right. Odadel, this is Dele, soon reported to Williams that several provincial government Republic of New Africa representatives attended a medical conference in Boston and, quote, won a resolution to support some doctors, indicating their willingness to provide medicines and certain equipment to Tanzania. Brother Amir also mentioned to Williams growing support for the Republic of New Africa from advocates whom in 1968 attended the third annual Black Power Conference in Philadelphia, as well as the nationalist-minded students from various colleges and universities across the United States. The 1968 Black Power Conference and a student conference of Howard University both passed resolutions recognizing the provincial government and pledging to establish consulates at black colleges as well as white colleges with black student caucuses. I think it says caucuses. Yeah, these students' purpose was to organize, quote, organize to advance the fight for land and power, end quote. Finally, Brother Amir notified Williams that a conscious citizen in Atlanta donated over 100 acres of land to the RNA, a potential site for a Republic capital. RNA leaders plan to use another plot of land they were purchasing in Mississippi to establish a library, infirmary, and community housing. According to Brother Amir, Williams never acknowledged having received word of these updates. In fact, once back in the United States, Brother Amir maintained that the president did not want any information regarding the Republic of New African's plan, and instead insisted his unawareness would help him, quote, say truthfully that he didn't know anything, end quote, during this looming Senate testimony. It was in the midst of these troubles with Williams that the infamous 1969 New Bethel shooting occurred. New Africans were meeting at New Bethel Baptist Church in Detroit on the final weekend of March to celebrate their movement and plan its future course. After several discussions and festivities, Brother Gadai, I can't say it, gave the closing address and then departed the church building with several legionnaires who escorted him to his car. Just seconds after he drove off, the powder charged the field and shootout between legionnaires and police became volatile, characterized by the last historian Amin Rejman as a tensions-filled display of manhood that was bound to explode. The Legion's first shootout with Detroit police exacted innumerable short and long-term repercussions that the Republic of New African's nation-building process. Arrested attendees complained that the police stole over $800 in cash and bus and airline tickets, end quote. Tortured several legionnaires, including Brother Amir's teenage son and namesake. The Republic of New Africa also lost some of its priceless original documents. Among the arrestees were Clarence Chaka, quote unquote, Fuller and Raphael Vera, both whom the city of Detroit eventually tried for second-degree murder and assault with intent of unaliving. Both were acquitted, but Brother Chaka soon thereafter met his unaliving in a stabbing incident that his sister and the RNA's Detroit consulate claimed was police retaliation for the unaliving of Officer Michael Kakspixia. Given the violently repressive atmosphere in which black activists from all political persuasion operated in it is somewhat difficult to imagine the full impact of the New Bethel shootout on potential RNA supporters and the Detroit consulate. For many people who learned about the shootout, it may have been just another battle between police and black people, quote, radicals, end quote. On the other hand, the news of the slain officer may have attracted some African American adventurous who are tired of police brutality and wanted to participate in such gun battles for retaliation. It is also reasonable to assume that the shootouts, or shoot-ins, quote unquote, as some have called it, repelled people otherwise drawn to the idea of black nation state. In fact, one new African state that the shootout frightened people who were otherwise willing to sell land to the provisional government. By March 1969, Black Power activists had lost many of their white supporters. Go figure. With rare exceptions, black nationalists depended solely on African American support, and black activists experienced severe fragmentation among their ranks, despite the utilization of Black Power Conference to unify with one another. What is more, in an era when the most visible ideological thrust advocated working within the U.S. political system of black liberation, the New Bethel incident may have done more to justify that approach than to encourage black Africans to struggle for political and physical independence. However, like the Black Panther Party, the Republic of New Africa gained some allies who believed the police provoked violence exchange in order to justify the repression of black nationalists and revolutionaries. Within the provincial government, Republic of New Africa, the shootout proved to Brother Gadai and his supporters that a calculated educational organized process in the North was the safest way to bring about their desired results, because he considered the RNA to be at war. Brother Amir believed that the RNA's best move was to head south and begin building their nation in their desired land. Disagreements over this relocation soon caused the provisional government to implode. The September 1969 Republic of New African President Robert F. Williams made his triumphant return to the United States after 8 years of exiles. Brother Gandhi, can't say the dang word right, arranged for his arrival in Detroit, where New Africans built enough legal, military, and political support to ensure his safety. Still, Williams' arrival provoked a lot of confusion. First, authorities in London, England, briefly detained and incarcerated Williams and refused to permit him aboard any aircrafts for fear that he would hijack it. Jesus Christ. Because they considered him a, quote, dangerous cargo. Fucking hell. The British Home Office instead offered him passage by ship. As several British Black Power advocates demonstrated outside the Pentavilla prison, the facility where Williams was detained for a couple of days. Brother Gadia negotiated with British officials. After much bargaining, it finally seemed that the provincial government, Republic of New African President-elect was making his way home. Meanwhile, in Detroit, legionnaires and police made their way to the Metropolitan Airport to meet the exile activists upon noticing that a man with a surname Williams would soon land in the city. However, the Republic of New Africa president-elect was not on the expected flight. Yeah, because they made him freaking do a boat. And instead, and quite by accident, and, quote, neatly dressed English businessman named Robert Edward Williams met the confused police and legionnaires. When the correct Williams finally arrived in the Detroit area on September 12, 1969, members of the Black Legion, FBI agents, and local police welcomed him. Oh my gosh. High tensions between U.S. Armed Forces and the Legion without standing, no violence erupted. After yet another brief detention, Williams walked the Detroit streets on bail. The New Africans expected Williams' highly anticipated homecoming to re-energize and organize the New African independence movement. It instead presented yet another hindrance for the provincial government of Republic of New Africa. Williams' return brought to the surface internal conflicts that had been brewing for over a year. And in that time, Brother Amir gained a reputation as a unaliving militant and an impulsive authoritarian whose ideas clashed with those of the other leadership. He threatened the British government with international demonstrations when it apprehended Williams, and he was accused of planting a boom at the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. Further, it was rumored that several people did not trust some Republic of New African leadership and cadres, including Chokwe Lumumba. I think it's Lumumba. Because he and others were suspected to be FBI informants. Holy shit. Police provocateurs and actual informants played no small role in creating and exacerbating that distrust. They doctored counterfeit letters from, quote, concerned brothers, end quote, and drafted fake correspondence from Brother Amir to members of the Detroit Black Panther Party with whom local New Africans enjoyed cordial relationships. By November 1969, informants contended that the Detroit consulate was, quote, falling apart. Brother Amir and other leaders constantly requested money from New Africans and Black United Front members with whom they had formed an alliance to protect Williams. This money was to go to Williams' Defense Fund and to assist less fortunate New Africans and members of local communities. To make matters worse, funds allocated to purchase land in Mississippi disappeared, thus causing further disharmony within the Republic of New Africa. That doesn't seem good. The collective damage done by these and other factors proved irreparable. I think it's irreparable. By November 1969, when Brother Amir reassigned from his position as Minister of Interior and Midwest Regional Vice President, during that same month, Brother Robert stepped down from the presidency. Brother Amir charged that Williams and Brother Gadi violated RNA's law of unilaterally making important decisions, including their suspension of Brother Amir for allegedly withholding membership information from Gadia and threatening to start his own organization. In light of these allegations and his suspension, Brother Amir abdicated his post in protest. Shortly after, Williams told the Detroit News that he was more interested in solving his legal problems and fighting for integration than building an independent Black nation state. He did assert, however, that if white Americans refused to allow African Americans to actualize their self-determination, he would again support the creation of a separate Black nation. Muhammad Ahmad, one of the resigned president's associates from RAM, instead, Williams left because he sensed that the ranks of the PG were heavily infiltrated with agents of the state and, quote, romantic left-wing aventurism. During the same moment, the percolated, I gotta look up that word. Right back. Gotta look up this word, everybody. That's right, percolating. Yeah, long percolating ideological and strategic conflicts between I can't say this person's name. It's just the G-A-I-D, just like, my brain just goes, how do you do it? How do you pronounce it? You know what I mean? I keep on saying Gadia and Amir bubbled to the surface. Although Brother Amir described the dispute as a, quote, family squabble, of little consequence to the RNA, the dispute's roots lay partially in a very important strategic disagreement that profoundly affected the provisional government and its supporters. On one side, Amir and his supporters favored moving RNA headquarters to Mississippi in order to implement their nation-state building process within a captive, quote-unquote, homeland. On the other side, Gaddi and several others argued that Republic of New Africa headquarters should remain in Detroit, and New African leadership should focus on deliberate organizing and legal strategies. The former function seemed determined to present a direct challenge to the United States in a matter that would bring about unavoidable violent confrontation more quickly. The latter camp's approach appeared safer. It intended to mitigate any further violence between Republic of New African's military and local authorities. The Detroit News and Detroit Free Press publicized this conflict, thus preventing the brothers and their respective supporters from hiding their rifles. Still, there was more to the conflict than what the Abedel brothers stated in public. The Republic of New Africa was also undergoing what some refer to as its first, quote, constitutional crisis, end quote. Since the 1968 Black Government Convention, the provisional government had yet to ratify a constitution. Instead, the Republic of New African's governing body based its decision on actions on original documents such as New African Declarations of Independence and the Government Administration Handbook. An establishing constitutional commission was not able to approve the Constitution by its deadline on December 1st, 1969. Divided by strategy, the Abedels purposed two different course of action to ratify the crisis. Brother Gaddi argued for an open election of PG officers during the convention in January, while Brother Amir recommended that regional representatives carry out PG elections, a measure he believed ensured all New Africans a voice. The acting judges in this dispute decided that if 40% of the general population could attend a meeting to cast their votes, then Brother Gaddi's suggestions would win. Gaddi rejected the ruling. On January 1st, the PG authorities lost its legal basis due to PG's expired, quote-unquote, terms of office. In his stated attempt to carry out already planned businesses, Brother Amir hosted a Republic of New African Constitutional Convention in Detroit on January 23rd to the 24th. About 30 New African attendees as representatives, quote, from 7 or 8 cities, end quote, and they elected interim officer to serve for 3 months. Brother Gaddi, Queen Mary Moore, and 8 other officials in the provincial government Republic of New Africa boycotted the meeting and planned a convention for July. Others included Chakui Lumumba and respected Detroit elder named Anwar Pashi, also known as Henry Papa Wells. And several members of the Black Legion attempted to support both factions as they sought to bring unity back to the Republic of New African leadership. Despite those attempts by Brother Gaddi's sister Betty Shabazz and several other leaders resigned from their positions, giving Brother Amir and his newly assembled governing body complete control over the Republic of New Africa. Brother Gaddi, still, quote, absolutely a political separatist, end quote, by his own admission, moved to Detroit suburbs to enjoy a break from the movement. With his newly attained power and newly approved constitution, quote, the Code of Umanja, M-U-M-O-J-A, end quote. RNA President Abedallah Abdallah, I think, moved the organization headquarters south, first to New Orleans in May 1970s. In March 1971, New Africans moved the RNA headquarters to Mississippi. During a landed dedication ceremony, they declared Il Malik in Bolton, the capital, with between 3,000 and 5,000 estimate citizens of record. The PG's move south marked a new chapter in the Republic of New Africa, and let me get this one right, if you don't mind. New African Independence Movement. History. Intense national organized ideological struggles and difficulty with government infiltration characterized the first 2 years of the PGRNA's existence. In that period, New Africans made national headlines due to the audacity of their goals and because of their violent interactions with police. Also, during that time, they experienced forceful growing pains resulting from their divergent views regarding the issues of independence and territorial sovereignty for African people in the United States. Those growing pains did not ease up with the provincial government Republic of New African's strategic move to the south. Instead, New Africans encountered a new series of challenges that determined the course of their organizing for over a decade. And we're going to end there. The next one will be incarceration, contention, and persistence. So it looks like we're developing into a separation, and these people decide not to do that. And like now there's a split, and now they're reorganizing, consolidating, and coming up new things. So like it looks like we're going to have a new break in the history of this. It looks like. So, and of course, what white supremacist country is not going to have contentions with black excellence coming into play and developing, a territory that serves the interests of black people, of New Africans that live here? Like, what are they like? And it is a bold thing, especially in the white settler colonialism. It's got to be dangerous to do these things. Especially as black people. Hello. So that, yeah. So we're going to end there. It's just a lot of history. It's a lot of like, this happened here, and this is why this happened. This happened here. This happened at this date. And then they moved to this date. And they did this date. And then they came to this atrocity this date because Williams came back and was like, was just weird, and all that. And I can see why that shootout after they left could cause people to like second guess, especially white people. White people get scared as fuck quickly. You know what I mean? Like, oh no, it's the end of everything. When it's like, no, it's retreat, it's consolidation. It's the retreat doesn't mean defeat. It means to go back and consolidate and to rebuild and stuff and to keep progressing forward. So to me, this really feels protracted in their ways, and there's a lot of contention. It sounds like in the beginning, It sounded like it was pretty, it had both its liberals and its progressive units, and it looks like it had some like communists in there. So it looks like it was a plethora of a whole bunch of things. So it's going to be interesting. So does anybody have any questions or anything before I close it out? See what's the next thing they're going to bring up. Let's see what's next. Oh, I got to make a note. Hold on a second. Let me do this first. Add a bookmark. All right, let's take a bookmark off. Bookmark, table of contents. Wow, we went from 33 to 54. So we're ending on page 54, everybody, in the text. What is the next set of things? Hold on, let me look. I'll go back up. I just want to check this out. Ooh, it's chapter 2, the fruition of black power, paper citizenship, and the intellectual foundations of the lifestyle politics. It's okay. Chapter 2, we're coming on to chapter 2 pretty quick. Again, this is from my organization that I'm a part of, the Locos Maoist movement that I'm a part of. One of the leaders